Greetings audit addicts, forensic fans, and those of you who know that behind every miracle product lies a very messy autopsy. You're just in time. Ah, the sweet scent of morning. Unless that morning scent is laced with enough forever chemicals to turn your breakfast cereal into a petri dish for corporate negligence. Welcome back to Serial Killers, the only true crime channel that proves the scariest monsters aren't hiding under your bed. They're hiding in the boardroom. Today we are looking at two cases of industrial horror that'll make you want to swear off consumer goods entirely and just live in a self-sustaining biodome. It's a classic case of, oops, we accidentally poisoned humanity. Again. Viewer discretion is advised. Before we dive into the toxic sludge, a quick heads up. Today's episode contains descriptions of corporate gaslighting and medical body horror that make most slasher films look like a spa day. If you have a low tolerance for systemic negligence or the thought of your jawbone making a break for it, you might want to clutch your non-toxic pearls now. You've been warned. In one corner, we have the original industrial tragedy, the heartbreaking story of the Radium Girls. In the other corner, we have the slow-motion, invisible threat that is PFAS, the forever chemical currently doing laps in your bloodstream as you watch this. Think of it as a historical showdown of corporate cover-ups, scientific denial, and the horrifying consequences of asking too many or not enough questions. So grab a bowl, hopefully not coated in non-stick residue, and let's get into it. Okay, let's jump in a time machine. We're heading back to the early 1900s. War is raging in Europe, and in New Jersey and Connecticut, young women are finding employment at the U.S. Radium Corporation. It was the roaring 20s, jazz was in the air, flapper dresses were in style, and glow-in-the-dark was the hottest new trend. Their job? Simple. Paint the tiny dials of military watches and clocks with undiluted radium-226. This stuff was sold as the wonder drug. Seriously. They were drinking radium-laced water using radium toothpaste for that shining smile. And the women at the USRC, well, they were working right in the source. Now, radium is fascinating, scientifically speaking. If you could zoom down to the atomic level, you'd see why. Radium is highly radioactive. It emits alpha particles, which are essentially high-energy helium nuclei. While these particles can't penetrate paper, if they get inside you, well, that's where the problem starts. The factory managers, the guys not painting the dials, understood this enough to take precautions. But the women? They were instructed to point their fine brushes with their lips and tongues to keep the brush precise. Think about that for a second. Every brushstroke meant licking a dose of potent alpha emitters directly into their bodies. They were told it was completely harmless. They'd joke about it. They'd paint their nails with the excess. They'd even paint their teeth to give them a radiant glow on dates. They were literally shining on the inside. But what they didn't know was that radium, biochemically, behaves a lot like calcium. When it gets into the human body, the skeletal system mistakes it. The body sees radium floating around and thinks, oh neat, extra calcium. I'll just tuck that away into the bones. Radium gets incorporated directly into the bone matrix, and there it sat, emitting alpha particles, constantly, right in the bone marrow and the surrounding tissue. A few years into the work, the consequences started. The women complained of joint pain, their teeth started rotting out, their jaws would fracture under the slightest pressure. This wasn't just illness, this was skeletal collapse caused by constant internal radiation damage. The specific condition became known as Radium Jaw, a horrifying slow decay of the mandible. They went to doctors. U.S. Radium denied everything. The doctors, often paid by the corporation, would diagnose them with syphilis, which, yeah, that's a real classic cover-up right there. It's not our glow paint, it's just your vibrant social life. They fought for years, they sued, U.S. Radium delayed, obfuscated, and played the legal equivalent of I can't hear you. The women, terminally ill, often too weak to walk, gave testimonies from their deathbeds. Finally, in 1928, a lawyer named Raymond Berry took their case. They managed to win a settlement. It wasn't a life-saving fortune, but it did expose the lie. And more importantly, the case of the Radium Girls changed labor safety standards forever. Because of their sacrifice, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission eventually came into existence. It was a victory written in their own, sadly literal, glow-in-the-dark skeletons. You're probably thinking, wow, the Radium Girls, that was 100 years ago. Corporatocracy is much better now, right? We've learned our lesson about poisoning people for profit. Oh, you sweet summer child. Fast forward to the mid-20th century and say hello to the wondrous world of chemistry. Specifically, the chemistry that makes your fried eggs slide perfectly off the pan and prevents your raincoat from turning into a soggy sponge. This is where things get really fun, by which I mean really terrifying. While radium was a radioactive bull in a china shop, the next chemical we're looking at is a chemical ghost, PFAS. To understand why PFAS is so dangerous, you have to understand the chemistry. PFAS stands for per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. It's a family of thousands of man-made chemicals characterized by a chain of carbon and fluorine atoms. You see that connection? The carbon-fluorine bond? That right there is the strongest single bond in organic chemistry. It's like the chemical equivalent of vibranium. Nothing in nature really breaks it down. Not sunlight, not heat, not time, and certainly not the bacteria in your wastewater treatment plant. Because this bond is so strong, PFAS repel both water and oil. It's a magic trick of chemistry. It's what makes Teflon non-stick, Scotchgard stain repellent, and firefighting foam highly effective. It was a goldmine. Companies like 3M and DuPont, now Chemours, patented these compounds and put them in everything. Pizza boxes, cosmetics, medical equipment, carpets, fast food wrappers. If it resists moisture or grease, you can almost guarantee it's got a CF bond in it. The problem, which the chemical companies knew internally as early as the 1950s and 1960s, is that nothing breaks it down. When you use your non-stick pan, trace amounts of PFAS can migrate into your food. When that pan gets scratched and you throw it out, the PFAS sits in the landfill. When it rains, the PFAS runs off into the soil, the groundwater, and the rivers. It's called the forever chemical for a reason. Once it's created, it stays. It accumulated in the environment. And because we are part of the environment, it accumulated in us. The story of the Radium Girls had a dramatic, horrifying payoff. They glowed. Their bodies fell apart. The evidence was undeniable, even if corporations tried to deny it. PFAS is much smoother. It's a true crime killer that operates with stealth. As humans ingest PFAS through food, water, and even air, because yes, it can be attached to dust particles. It doesn't leave the body easily. Again, look at how the human body works. Our bodies are designed to expel waste. Kidneys filter water, the liver processes toxins. But PFAS chemicals mimic certain natural biological structures. Specifically, they are fatty acid analogs. This allows them to bind to proteins in the blood, and the kidneys are highly efficient at reabsorbing them instead of excreting them. So they just hang out in your bloodstream for years. They build up. Internally, DuPont and 3M knew that these compounds were toxic to test animals. Their own studies showed they caused birth defects, liver damage, and cancers in monkeys and rats. What did they do? Did they sound the alarm? Did they warn the public? They hid the data. They classified the studies. They continued to market PFAS as miracles of modern chemistry, the best friend of the American housewife. The crisis finally broke in West Virginia and Ohio near a DuPont factory, later Chemours, in Parkersburg. The story mirrors the Radium Girls case, just updated for the 21st century. This time, instead of factory workers dying, it was entire communities. Local residents, including a farmer named Earl Tennant, whose cattle were dying of bizarre ailments, started noticing things were wrong. The river next to the DuPont plant ran gray. It had foam on it that was visible from space. If the Radium Girls were a sprint toward a tragic finish line, the battle against DuPont was a 20-year marathon through a swamp of redacted documents and dead cattle. In 1998, Robert Belot was a corporate defense attorney, the kind of guy who usually helped chemical companies. But then he got a call from Wilbur Tennant, a West Virginia cattle farmer whose herd was dying in ways that defied biology. We're talking blackened teeth, massive tumors, and internal organs that looked like they'd been dipped in acid. DuPont claimed it was just poor animal husbandry. Belot, smelling a rat or a very toxic cow, filed a federal suit in 1999. What he found in the subsequent discovery phase wasn't just a leak, it was a decades-long conspiracy. Belot forced DuPont to hand over dozens of boxes of internal memos. He spent months literally sitting on the floor, connecting dots that the company thought were buried forever. He discovered a chemical called PFOA, perfluorooctanoic acid, also known as C8 because of its 8-carbon chain. Here's the serial killer fact check on what DuPont knew while they were telling the public PFOA was as harmless as table salt. 1961. DuPont's own toxicologists concluded that PFOA was toxic and should be handled with extreme care. 1981. After discovering that 2 out of 7 pregnant employees in the Teflon division gave birth to children with eye defects, DuPont moved women off the line, but they never reported the data to the EPA. 1984. DuPont secretly sent employees to local gas stations to tap the water. They found PFOA in the local drinking supply at levels far exceeding their own internal safety limits. Their response? A meeting in Delaware where they decided not to disclose the findings because it would create liability. In 2001, Bilot filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of the residents of the Mid-Ohio Valley. But here was the legal catch-22. Because PFOA was an unregulated chemical, there were no government safety limits to prove DuPont had broken. So Bilot did something unprecedented in legal history. As part of a 2004 settlement, he didn't just ask for a payout, he demanded a science panel. DuPont had to pay for a massive medical study of 70,000 local residents to determine if PFOA actually caused disease. It took 7 years. 7 years of people waiting to find out if the water they'd been giving their kids was a slow-acting poison. In 2012, the panel delivered the verdict. A probable link existed between PFOA and 6 major conditions: kidney cancer, testicular cancer, thyroid disease, high cholesterol, ulcerative colitis, and pregnancy-induced hypertension. This wasn't just a win, it was a scientific execution of DuPont's defense. It led to over 3,500 individual personal injury claims. In 2017, DuPont and its spin-off Chemours agreed to pay $670.7 million to settle the remaining cases. You'd think a $600 million bill and a mountain of evidence linking your product to cancer would be a never-again moment, right? Wrong. While Bilot was fighting them in court, DuPont was already performing a chemical vanishing act. Under pressure from the EPA to phase out C8, they didn't stop making non-stick chemicals, they just shortened the chain. They introduced GenX, which turns out to be almost identically toxic and equally impossible to break down in the environment. It was like swapping one strain of the superflu for another and saying, hey, we fixed it. So, where does that leave us in this industrial cage match? In one corner, the Radium Girls, a tragedy so bright it literally glowed, ending in a legal victory that paved the way for every safety manual collecting dust in your HR office today. In the other corner, PFAS, the forever chemical that doesn't need a factory, it just needs a raindrops and a breeze to find its way into your morning omelet. The contrast is wild. Radium was a localized explosion. PFAS is a global saturation. Radium attacked the bone. PFAS attacks the very chemistry of how our bodies function. But the DNA of the crime is identical. It's the same old story, a discovery that makes life easier for the consumer and richer for the shareholder, followed by decades of hiding the receipt that shows the true cost. As we mentioned, the legal catch-22 meant DuPont and 3M could play a game of chemical whack-a-mole. When PFOA became too hot to handle legally, they just tweaked the recipe. They introduced GenX. The marketing pitch was basically, hey, PFOA had 8 carbons and stayed in your body forever. GenX has 6 carbons, so it's smaller and safer. It's the corporate equivalent of a serial killer saying, I've retired the chainsaw, I only use a paring knife now. Much more refined, don't you think? But surprise, surprise. Independent studies have shown that these short-chain replacements are just as persistent in the environment and maybe even harder to filter out of our water. We traded a slow-moving disaster for a faster-moving one. We didn't solve the problem, we just changed its name. The serial killer takeaway here? True crime isn't always a guy in a ski mask. Sometimes the most dangerous entity in the room is a 10K filing and a team of lawyers with a waiting game strategy. Radium taught us that our bodies are not industrial disposable parts. PFAS is teaching us that our planet doesn't have a delete key for synthetic chemicals. We are living in a giant global chemistry experiment where the lab results won't be back for another 100 years. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the toxic sludge of history. If you've learned anything today, I hope it's that innovation should never be a synonym for secrecy. If you enjoyed this high-energy descent into corporate madness, do the living dead a favor and hit that subscribe button. Join the serial killers community where we investigate the historical skeletons, both the literal ones and the ones hidden in the corporate archives. A few final parting tips for the road. Don't lick the paint, seriously. Even if it's vintage and cool. If it glows, leave it alone. Check your cookware. If your non-stick pan looks like it went through a blender, it's time to retire it. Your liver will thank you. Stay curious. The only thing more dangerous than a forever chemical is a forever silenced whistleblower. Drop a comment below. If you could go back to 1920, what's the one piece of modern safety gear you'd give the Radium girls? Or better yet, what chemical do you think will be making a video about 50 years from now? This has been Serial Killers. Stay skeptical, stay vocal, and whatever you do, keep your breakfast and your bones radiation-free. See you in the next investigation.